It's a video made by Simon Blackwood in the summer of 2024. I'm in the cemetery at Muirkirk. Muirkirk's a small village in East Ayrshire. Beautiful countryside here, and it's about 30 miles south of Glasgow. It's west of Ayr, and then to the east of here is Edinburgh, which is about 40 miles away. I'm looking at a headstone erected by James Blackwood in 1829, October 20th, 1829, in memory of his deceased father and mother, Hugh Blackwood and Jean Bryce. Hugh Blackwood was a farmer. He came from Sawn, which is a little village about 10 miles away from Muirkirk. Hugh was born in 1722 about and died in 1791. And Jean Bryce, she was born in about 1750 here in Muirkirk and died in around 1819. As I say, Hugh and Jean were farmers. Hugh was to be the last farmer really in the family, because his sons were to go into industry. So we can see here that his son James Blackwood was a wright or carpenter. Today we call him a carpenter. The stone refers to Jean and Hugh's children who were deceased by 1829. They were Marion, Hannah, Elizabeth and Thomas, who all died of age. I really don't know much about Hannah, Elizabeth or Mary, but I do know quite a bit about Thomas. Thomas was my third great-grandfather, with Hugh and Jean being my fourth great-grandparents. So Thomas moved to Kirkintilloch, where he was a wright. He married Elizabeth Chalmers. He had several children, two of which I know a bit about. One was John Blackwood. I've made a video of John Blackwood. He was a locomotive superintendent who went to Stranraer, and he worked for Caledonian Railways and died in Stranraer in 1885. His sons, a number of them were marine engineers, including one, John Duncan Blackwood, who was to move to Liverpool, and I'm a descendant obviously of John Duncan Blackwood. So another child of Thomas's was Janet Blackwood. Her grandson Tom Johnston, was become a Scottish Labour Member of Parliament for Glasgow and eventually Secretary of State for Scotland. The stone here goes on to refer to a number of James Blackwood, who you'll remember was the wright who erected this stone in 1829 on October the 20th. So not only is he recognising his parents and four of his siblings who died, the stone that is erected also refers to a number of his children who had died in childhood, and they were Elizabeth and Marion, and John, his son, who died 27th of May, it looks like 1832, at the age of 17 years. It also refers to his son James Blackwood, who died 27th of February 1877, aged 67. Catherine Scott, his wife, and James Blackwood Jr., who died heads in 17th of May 1882, aged 54 years. So just a few other things about this cemetery. It's quite an interesting one. You'll see over there in the distance a plaque which has been erected to John Laprac. He was a poet and a miller. He lived in this village at the same time as Hugh and Jean, so in the 1700s. He died in the early 1800s. He was a poet and he knew Robbie Burns in the 1780s. Robbie Burns lived at Morshaline, which is not very far from here, on a farm with his brother, and he wrote a few epistles to John Laprac. As I say, you and Jean would have known John Laprac and therefore probably came into contact with Robbie Burns or knew of him. Hugh Blackwood's niece, Grizel Blackwood, married John Laprac's son, John. There's also a plaque over in back there to Isabel Pagan. She was a poet, and it's said that one of her songs was taken on by Robbie Burns, and a book of her songs and poems was produced in the early 1800s. Also in this cemetery are some plaques to some Covenanters. So they were Scottish Presbyterians and they were being persecuted by the English Crown, Charles II, defending their right to exercise their faith as Presbyterians, and John Smith was killed by English cavalry not very far from here, and there's a headstone to him. So this was known as the Killing Times, and this village was known as a Covenanter village. Finally, there's a plaque out the front to a John Blackwood, a merchant who went to Canada and left an inheritance to a number of the Blackwoods in this village. So a bit of history there for you about the Muirkirk Parish Cemetery and about the Blackwoods and a number of other people in this cemetery. Thanks for listening.